This is the Our York Media Podcast, an audio and video production that features the good news makers of York County, Pennsylvania. I'm your host, Rebecca Hanlon. I'm sitting down today with Michael Jefferson of Crispus Attucks. Michael, thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Before we jump into our conversation, we want to thank our sponsor. Today's episode is sponsored by Gladfelter Insurance Group. We appreciate their support of our Good News Initiative and giving us the opportunity to highlight nonprofits making a difference in York County. So, Michael, before we started recording, you were telling me a little bit about yourself. You're originally from Philadelphia. How did you end up coming to York, Pennsylvania?
Well, that's a long story that I'm going to make pretty quick. But I grew up in the city of Philadelphia, raised in a section, very nice section of Philly called Germantown, and the Mount Airy section. Had a very well-rounded childhood, mother and father in the home, grandmother in the home. I had one brother. Went through the Philadelphia school system, graduated from Germantown High School in 1969, and wasn't really sure of who I was. That was especially during the era of Black self-awareness, you know, in that era. So I went to a historically Black college in Hampton, Virginia, Hampton University. Graduated in 1973 with a bachelor's in business administration. And my first job was with the Liberty Mutual Insurance Company down in Atlanta, Georgia. And I'd never really been that far south.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed my time in Atlanta. But I really wasn't that into insurance. And so I ended up going back home. I think I was a little homesick. Ended up going back to Philadelphia, and I got a job with the city of Philadelphia as an employment specialist. It was actually called the Job or CETA program, Comprehensive Employment Training Act, I think it was at the time, which morphed into the Jobs Training and Partnership Act. Little did I realize I had a future in that, but I taught school for a little while in the city. And then I had a brother who was a state trooper in Lancaster.
Okay.
And he said sort of, go west, young man, go west. You need to get away from the big city and the grind of the big city. So I came to Lancaster, and I saw a job posted in the newspaper back then. That's how you look for work. And it talked about an employment center supervisor over in York, Pennsylvania, which I had never heard of. I knew about York peppermint patties, but I didn't know where they came from. I applied for that position, and then I was hired by Robert L. Simpson, who is still the CEO, executive director of CA. And so I started in October of 1986, and I've been at CA for the past 33 years.
Oh, wow.
As director of employment and training.
What were you getting into at that time?
Well, some good, some bad. You know, some people grow up sooner than later. I grew up later. And I was in my 30s, still sort of, again, trying to find my way. I had a business mindset, but a human service heart. And I wasn't really just comfortable in human service, in business. And I wasn't fully just comfortable even in sort of social service or education.
Yeah.
And the job at CA afforded me the opportunity to put both together, my business mind and my human service heart. I would say I was a very selfish individual. I mean, it was just all about me, and and I guess growing up during that time. And so, but I always had, again, a passion for people. I've always been what they quote unquote call a people person. And I was just trying to find my way, and CA afforded me that opportunity.
Okay. Crispus Attucks has been around for a really long time, especially in the New York community. What exactly, and I'm sure it's changed over time as the needs of the community have changed, but when you came on board at that time, really what was the pulse of the Crispus Attucks in the community?
Well, actually, in 1986, Crispus Attucks was just coming out of a very tumultuous period. but led by Bobby Simpson, it was transitioning from just being a social service agency, a recreational facility. Daycare was always preeminent from the 1930s when CA started, because especially African American families needed to have daycare, and the mothers basically could get a job even when the fathers couldn't. But it was again a social service agency, a recreational facility. But Bobby, in his infinite wisdom, knew that CA could not survive just being a recreational or social service, social outlet for the African American community. So I was part of that transition in the 1980s to take us from being basically, again, just that, a social service outlet or a community-based organization, to a more modern community-based organization that offered comprehensive services like employment and training and housing and things of that nature.
So was your position actually fairly new at that time?
It was actually 6 weeks old. I mean,
really?
I've had it since its infancy. I had some background in employment and training. I had a business background because it required me to be able to get out and meet with business and industry. Actually, the sort of founding members of it, along with CA, were a gentleman by the name of Carl New, who was head of the chamber at that time, and Al Heidemann, who was a city councilman. And they got together, partnered with the Rouse Foundation out of Columbia, Maryland, because York just was not hiring minorities. I didn't realize that it was only that long removed from the riots of 1969, which were fueled by inequalities in housing, employment. So there were a lot of issues here that when I got here, I was sort of like, man, what is this place? But I didn't really know about them until I got, involved in the community and CA.
At that time, in the 80s when you were coming on board and Crispus Attucks was going through this transformation, why do you think it was so important that it changed and tried to serve people differently?
Well, I truly believe, and Bobby and the board at that time truly believed, that if CA didn't move forward and didn't broaden its focus, it would cease to exist. And I believe that today. Recreation without education, without housing, decent housing, without affordable housing, jobs, just that whole idea of community development. We were up on George Street and 605 South Duke Street, but CA had to expand, and not only physically to now where we're a 4-block campus, but it had to evolve. It had to have a different mindset. And one of the mantras of our youth at CA, which has always been a major focus, is our kids, is that my destiny is to be educated, educated, educated. Without education, things just cease to exist, and you have to be educated in a lot of different areas. I'm not just talking about academically, but that really fueled where we were going, and that's why we're as successful as we are today.
What were some of the early challenges that you faced coming into that position?
Well, for me, again, it was just so different coming into a city that basically I called it the one and done philosophy. You might have one minority, one African American. Now, there weren't a lot of Latinos when I came in 1986, and naturally that's changed over time. But African Americans and women were lacking in most of the major companies. Now, manufacturing to some degree, yes, but there was still that sense of, well, we only need one, and there weren't a lot of minorities in management level positions. If they were, they're going to be at, sort of at the bottom of the ladder. And so my job was to sort of, again, open the doors up, though, to get individuals into the company, and then at the same time work, hopefully, that they would work their way up into some of the more mid-management or higher level, positions.
What were some of those early conversations like in the community?
Well, to be honest, with the help of Carl New, and I that guy was a champion, and he had the ear of business and industry in New York, and working in conjunction with Bobby and us as CA, we were able to open the doors, and I think business was open to having more of a minority representation. But the real struggle was in the trenches. The real struggle was with the frontline folks, the immediate supervisors who were not used to people who didn't look like them, think like them, act like them, come from where they come from. And just that lack of familiarity, the ignorance, so to speak, that just not knowing who these people were. And you still had the racial divide issues that fueled, the 1969 riots, which I had no idea had taken place.
Yeah. So, how did you make progress then early on in that work that you were doing?
Well, I've always believed that honesty is the best policy, that you sit down with somebody face to face, that you don't point fingers out, because there's always, then that means there's 4 pointing right back at you. And so I made relationships, and I pride myself on that over the past 33 years to even today. I think people know that I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not going to lie for you. There were businesses that I made mistakes in putting the wrong person in. And it actually had me reevaluate things. I started in 1986, around 1990, in the heart of the recession under the Clinton administration. I looked at, all the people I'm getting placed are the first hired, as far as minorities, and they're the first fired or they're first let go, especially during the recession. So I decided to change the name of the center from the Center for Crispus Attucks Employment Center to the Center for Employment and Training. And I went across the country. I even sent a staff person down to Texas to look at what was called the Center for Employment and Training, and that we had to broaden the context of how we operated from just putting people in jobs to preparing them to go to work, what we call job preparation before job placement, and more training so that they weren't the last hired, first let go once things got tight.
Did you see changes after that?
Yes, major changes. And again, I had to deal with my own population that wasn't used to being in majority settings as well.
Yeah.
It actually prompted me, probably more so in the mid to late 90s, to develop the Crispus Attucks Diversity, Culture Awareness, Sensitivity training. We called it Creating a Healthy Environment. And that went both ways, creating a healthy environment for individuals going into business and industry that, again, from minority, backgrounds, and also preparing the business and industry for those folks coming in. So it was sort of both two-sided.
Yeah. And
I still do that today for business and industries who are trying to hire. And now, naturally, you have the Latino population as well. To hire from different cultures, different backgrounds, and to understand, just some of the nuances when that takes place.
Yeah. So 33 years in this position. What have you seen change in that time period?
Well, I've said some things change and some things stay the same, but I do think business and industry now naturally is more open. to people of color, to females. Um, a lot of that, though, is predicated on the need for workers, period.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
Business and industry no longer has the luxury of just hiring from their own, the majority population or family members or whoever. And so we're seeing, doors open that were wider than they've ever been opened before. But you still have the maybe less overt issues of racism and discrimination that still have to be dealt with. And you still have individuals that still need better job preparation. We do a lot with what we call the soft skills. You can teach somebody how to operate a machine, but you can't teach them how to show up on time every day.
Yeah.
I have a mantra that I teach: if you're early, you're on time. If you're on time, you're late. If you're late, you're fired. And so we have to work with, sort of the individual and getting them to understand what work is. Work ethic is not a taught behavior. It's a learned behavior. And if you're growing up in an environment that people didn't get up and go to work every day, you're not going to necessarily have a work ethic.
Sure.
It has to be instilled in you. And I was lucky. I had parents who both went to work every day. Both they had very good jobs in Philadelphia, and so we learned. My brother and I learned work from day one.
Community-wise, in terms of maybe broader picture for Crispus Attucks, and now that you've been here a little longer and gotten to know York a little better, what do you see progress-wise for York as a whole when it comes to a lot of those things that we've talked about so far?
Well, I'm a history buff. I loved history, taught history in school, and I believe, again, if you don't learn from your history, you're doomed to repeat it. I think York still has a lot of issues that it is just now facing. I got ensconced in every aspect of the community I could, from education to community, social service events, to committees, boards, you name it. I'm on the Confronting Racism group. I'm on the Idea Center, started by the Jewish Community Center. Yeah. I'm on the York County Economic Alliance Board. I've been Fire Civil Service Commissioner. I tried to get involved in everything so I'd have a better view of where does this mindset of York County come from.
Yeah.
And I think overall it's a good place. It's a good county, but you have just those pockets, or you have, those individuals who still have that old mindset that everybody is not welcome. And so I think that's still a major issue, but there are things happening now that are trying to address those issues. Yeah. Again, confronting racism and a lot of there's some other groups. The York Daily Record is I know some people aren't happy with it, but if you don't uncover a wound, it's never going to heal, and then you can cover it. But these forums that they're having, looking back on the '69 race riots. Dr. Levy did a presentation at York College. All of these things, have to be done if we're ever going to heal. And I think York just tried to cover it up, and so that's why we're still having some of the issues we're having today.
Yeah. Yeah. You've mentioned a little bit the growing Latino population in York. How has that changed some of what you do, knowing that population is bigger than it ever really has been for us?
I guess it only changed, and again, that I had to, again, point the finger at myself and say, wait a minute, what do I know about this particular group of people? So, I started learning Hispanic culture. I was part of the, I think back in 2001 or 2002, started the first Latino Pride parade here in York. And Crispus Attucks, we serve more Hispanics than any group, probably ever. I mean, probably 60% of our clientele in our charter school, in our housing, in our community, are Latino. Mm. So, and part of my diversity training, I opened it up to, again, giving awareness to that particular population as well. So I think that, and if you look at basically the language difference is probably the preeminent, but there are some cultural nuances that I made sure I understood and then could pass on to my staff. And at CA, we make sure that we have Hispanics represented in our staffing as well.
How did you yourself try to get familiar with some of those cultural differences? I'm curious what you did to try to learn some of those things.
Well, again, I got involved in some of the Latino groups. Just sometimes sitting down to lunch, and just talking about some issues. Now we've got Latino Unidos, and Lou Rivera and his group. But people you have to drop some things and sit down and talk to people. If we sit down and talk to each other and find out, how am I different from you, and how are you different from me, and you recognize the differences. I know people say, well, I don't see color. Yeah, you do. You have to. It's real. But if we can deal with our differences, recognize our differences till the differences don't make a difference anymore, then I think that's the best way to overcome a lot of the issues that we're facing today.
What do you hope for York?
Well, my hopes for York are, again, that people, and it's may sound Martin Luther Kingish, but that people can sit down, black people, white people, brown, you name it, and I only use the colors because that's how we tend to identify groups, and just realize that we may have come over on different ships. I did not come over, my predecessors didn't come over on the Nina, Pinta, and Santa Maria, or on the Mayflower. Actually, they didn't even come here on their own choosing. We're not, South America trying to get across the border for, right, because they want to escape something. But we may have come over on different ships, but we're in the same boat now. And if we can realize that we're all in the same boat now, we're all looking to live a better life, have a quote unquote piece of the American pie, but if all I'm getting is crumbs, then I'm sure not going to be happy about it. And I see somebody else with a big slice. So, we here in York have to realize that this is, a scheme. It's all been devised to divide us and instead of bringing us together. But we have to make the choice and realize that if we don't come together, we're gonna continue to have major issues, and that's from the youngest child to the oldest senior.
Yeah. How do you envision Crispus Attucks? We've talked already about the needs of the community are always morphing and changing. How do you see Crispus Attucks continuing to be kind of on the forefront of what it is that York needs?
Well, I think the beauty of CA, and one of the things that I've loved about it, is that CA didn't stay stuck in its infancy.
Yeah.
CA grew out of a need. It grew out of a need for the African American community back in 1931 to have their own place, because they couldn't go to the Y and they couldn't go, the other places that majority people could go to. And so the black community formed its own social service outlet.
Yeah.
And it was a place you could come recreate and socialize. It had dance troupes and you name it. But again, over that 88, 89 year period, CA realized that we couldn't just stay there. And so the beauty is that not only did it open itself up to more of a comprehensive array of programs and services, but a more even comprehensive array of people. CA is black, white, Hispanic, Asian, you name it, working together to improve quality of life for people who need help the most. We have a hands up, not a hands out approach. We have our charter schools is a charter school built around those young people who have dropped out and now want to drop back in. Our employment services are based around people who have barriers to employment, whether they be ex-offenders, high school dropout rates, pregnant and parenting teens. Our housing program is low and affordable housing, but safe. We took housing over in the southeast section of York. That was the worst housing you ever want to see. When I came in 1986. Lead paint, exposed wiring, run down, you name it. And we've built that southeast section of the city up to now it's the most beautiful. It's the gateway from the south. I mean, you come into York Hospital off 83, heading to the business district, come through the Boundary Avenue section, the Loretta Claiborne building. WellSpan invested in that community. You have the Junior Achievement building. You have the Susan Burns Center, who was one of the first persons who realized that CA could do something with that area. That's their own, own entity, but they saw what we could do to revitalize the community. So CA has always had a vision to do more, to do better, and again, our service is open to everyone. We're not just a black organization. I think that's a misperception throughout York County. We are everybody trying to help people who need help the most.
Yeah. Looking back over your time that you've been in this organization and really started up a position that didn't exist before, what are you most proud of when you look over that time?
I'm probably most proud of seeing an individual. I was over in Lancaster actually at one of the new malls over there, and I was sitting down and I'm waiting for my wife. She's shopping, of course. And then a gentleman sat down with me next to me, and he was from York, and I sort of recognized. He said, "Do you remember me?" I said, "No, I'm not. Well, your face looks familiar. I can't think of your name." He said, "You helped get me into Harley Davidson 31 years ago." And he said, I just retired.
Oh, wow.
And then I ran into a young lady who works for York County, who I had placed there probably, I think, 1 or 2 years after I started. And she's still working down with the county government. People like that you placed them years ago, and and then you didn't forget about them, but you've gone on to help other folks, but you realize that here's somebody who 30-something years and is ready to retire from a place. That gives me, that just brightens my whole day. Of course, you've got the folks who didn't make it, and you have to always be able to sort of look at, hey, I can't help everybody, can't save everybody. But when you can latch on to the folks, and then seeing young people that have graduated from our charter school or come through my youth employment services, and you see that you go in a store or you go in someplace, and they say, hey, Mr. J, I have a nickname. They call me Ching Ching. I'm the money guy. I'm trying to put money in their pockets, and you hear them say Ching Ching. They're making money. They have a job, and hopefully they can take care of themselves and their kids and be contributing members of society. That's what keeps me going.
I think that's awesome. Yeah. Well, Michael, thank you for coming on and sharing with us a little bit about who you are and what Crispus Attucks does. I'm excited to see what comes next.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening. For more information on Our York Media and our Good News Initiative, you can visit ouryorkmedia.com. We appreciate your attention and give bonus points for those who subscribe. We want to thank Gladfelter Insurance Group for sponsoring this episode. The Our York Media podcast is produced by Will Hanlon. I'm Rebecca Hanlon. Thanks so much for listening.